Introducing the remarkable archetype, the dangerous gentleman. With a demeanor that commands respect and a hint of potency, he embodies strength tempered by virtue. Though his capabilities could veer towards danger, he channels his power for noble causes, serving others and safeguarding those in need. Rooted in a profound love for both God and humanity, he navigates life with discipline and purpose. In his presence, one witnesses the harmonious blend of power and benevolence, a testament to the true essence of masculinity. Step into the world of the dangerous gentleman, where strength is wielded for righteousness, and discover a captivating embodiment of honor and valor. Welcome to Storytime with the Dangerous Gentleman. Yes, I am the Dangerous Gentleman. No, I did not give myself that nickname, but I certainly did earn it. So today it's going to be kind of a collection of stories that culminated in this last week. As you know, and if you listen to some of my other podcasts, you realize that I was in a car accident now about 3 weeks ago. And in that car accident, my old car was totaled. Okay, so let me tell you the story about how I got that car in the first place. Well, actually, let me tell you a little bit even more than that. I've also talked on here about how when I moved to Yakima, I didn't own a car, that my life was a mess, that my credit was terrible, and my income, I had very little money, and I really was in a rough place. When I moved here and I got a couple of paychecks, I decided I would start looking for a car. So I started to fill out applications and walk around. I walked around to different places and made phone calls to kind of see what the local landscape was. Well, when you do that, if any of you have ever done that, it's kind of a pain in the butt, but you start to get phone calls from all over the place. So I get a phone call from this guy up in Seattle, which is about a 2.5, 3 hour drive. And remember, I don't own a car, but he's like, hey, yeah, if you get up here to Seattle, we'll get you in a car. He guaranteed me that if I got to Seattle, they would get me a car. Now this is February, so it's cold. And so in order to get to Seattle, I had to walk like 3 miles across town into a not so great part of Yakima. Kind of shady. And to get on a bus. And so I get on a bus, I buy a ticket, and I get up to Seattle. And I had to walk from then the bus station over to the car dealership. And the guy shows me a bunch of cars. We test drive some. And we decide that we were going to try to work out a deal for this particular one. Well, like I said, my credit is about 400 at this point. So I don't have a whole lot of money for a down payment. But he's like, I can get you in. I can do it. We can make this happen. So he starts doing his wheeling and dealing, and I got to make phone calls, and I'm trying to find someone who can co-sign for me and all this stuff. And my mom agrees to co-sign. And I do the best I can to come up with whatever I can for a down payment, and he can't make the deal happen. And we probably sat there for 3 hours between driving cars and we're trying to work out deals. It was 3 to 4 hours, and he can't make it happen. And he's like, dude, I'm so sorry. He's like, you do realize that you made a guarantee that I was going to be able to drive home in a car. And he's like, I know, man. I'm sorry. So give him some credit. He did out of pocket pay for me to get a bus ticket to take it back from Seattle to Yakima. And he gave me $20 for dinner, but it was still like 3 hours. And remember, it's February, so it's cold. So I walked around downtown Seattle for 2 to 3 hours waiting for the time when the bus left. And so then I get back on the bus, and then it's about 3 hours back to Yakima in February. And now it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm in a shady part of town. And it is not just February, but there's a lot of snow, and that particular night was super cold. It was like in the single digits. Now I got to walk 4 miles from the bus station back to my house, starting in this shady part of town, starting at 1 o'clock in the morning. And I probably got back to my place at like 2:30 in the morning. So that was my first little foray into buying a car. I'm not even here, but that was my first attempt. I keep checking, I keep looking around, I get another paycheck. So now I go to another place to try to look for a car. And I meet this guy named Ruben. This Ruben's a solid guy, and he worked with me, and we found some cars, and we drove around in them. And like, Over the course of 3 or 4 hours that you spend with a car salesman, as you all know, it takes a ridiculous amount of time to buy a car. Anyway, he's kind of asking me my story, and I'm telling him what's going on, and I'm telling him the situation that I'm in, how I moved to a new town. I've got, drugs in my history, and my life is a mess, and my career is a mess, and everything is a mess. And so he met me at my worst. He met me when my life was just barely out of the bottom, just getting out of the bottom of that hole. And so he really wants to work with me. And so we find a car. It wasn't great, but I just needed a car by that point. And so we work out a pretty decent deal, and we got the financing, and I give him the down payment and all this stuff. And I am actually able to leave in a car. Like Ruben and I, we ended up connecting on Facebook. And anyway, we kind of kept up with each other over the years. But anyway, a couple days after I picked this car up, he calls me and says, "Hey man, I'm really sorry, but we couldn't work out the deal. It fell through." And I'm like, "Oh, crap. Here we go again. This guy made me a promise. This guy made me a deal." And he's like, "But we might still be able to work something out." So I drive the car back. I'm fully expecting now to be able to return this car and having to walk home and be back on my feet again. Which I don't mind. I love walking. But to be back having to be on my feet. So I pull in and he's like, "Listen, man, I know we weren't able to get you this car, but I got you something better." And it was better. It was like 5 years newer, much nicer car. Payment was about the same. I don't know how the motor vehicle industry works, how they price cars or how they work out deals. Something about it being newer, so it was under warranty or something like that. Anyway, it was a 2012 Volkswagen Passat, which is, for me, was a much newer car than I had driven in quite a while, and probably the nicest car that I had owned up until that point. And the payments weren't great, but they were okay. A little bit of a stretch sometimes. But I was in a car and I was mobile again. That's the car that I drove up until just a few weeks ago. That was my car. Fortunately, I was able to pay that car off early, and I actually paid it off at the beginning of COVID in 2020. So business was starting to tank. Business was starting, not tank, but it was starting to noticeably decrease because of the world being in chaos and craziness. So I was able to get the last payment in right when all that stuff started to happen. So I didn't have a car payment for the last 4 years, and I didn't have a car payment that whole time until now. But there's definitely a silver lining in this story. Now I need to go back even further. So my dad is a medical doctor. And with 5 kids in the family and horses and all the stuff that we had, he pretty much drove around in whatever family vehicle we had. Station wagon, van, sedan, whatever it was. And he just didn't really have like his doctor car. And then at one point, he's just like, "You know what? Even if it's just for a few years, I want my doctor car." And so in the mid 80s, he bought a Trans Am, back when Trans Ams were cool. Now, this was a cool car. This was a white Trans Am. Like, that thing would get up and go. Now, he rarely did that when we were in the car, but I know my dad, and I know that there were times when he took that car out and just went fast. He just had some fun in that car, but he felt like he had earned it. And like looking back on it now, I got no problem with that. I got no problem with driving a car like that every once in a while, right? Owning something like that. When you've earned something nice, take advantage of it. You've earned it. That doesn't mean that you should always live that way. That doesn't mean you should always go after material possessions, but every once in a while, it's okay. So my dad had his doctor car. And for most of my life, I have not driven nice cars. I have not driven great cars. Like, I've driven what I could afford. And sometimes they were okay, and sometimes they were decently nice or whatever. But again, I fell into the same pattern that my dad had. I got married, not early, but I got married right as my career started. I had 3 kids very quickly, and expenses went up real fast, and my income didn't go up as fast as my family grew, and so at times were sometimes tight. We didn't always drive the greatest cars. We had a couple of minivans. We had a little SUV. We drove my ex-wife's old Jeep. And at one point, sorry, this is I wasn't going to tell this part, but this is actually pretty funny. At one point, when my daughter was in the hospital, our cars weren't working well. We put the call out to some people in our church to see if anybody had a car that we could borrow or use or have. And these people, they were very well-meaning. They gave us this old Buick. This thing was old and it was gutless. And it didn't seem to matter. Like, we tried to fix a few things here and there on it, but it was embarrassing to drive because if you came to a complete stop at a stoplight or a stop sign and you had to get going very quickly, you put your foot in it, it was about 0 to 60 in about 10 minutes. Now, I'm exaggerating some, but it was embarrassing how slowly this vehicle accelerated. And there was something wrong with it, right? It wasn't just that it was old. There was something wrong. And I don't know if it was the transmission. I don't know much about cars, but it was a very humbling experience because here I am now. I'm a doctor and I'm driving this piece of crap car. And I've got a wife and I've got a son at home and I've got a daughter in the hospital and we're driving this anyway and showing up to places. Thankful that we had another car. It was actually our second car because I needed to drive back and forth to work. And my ex needed to drive to the hospital to see our daughter and take my son places and stuff like that. So we needed a second car. And so eternally thankful, but still my wife almost died in it because she was going around a corner and the power steering all of a sudden went out. It's a big old Buick and she's got my son in the back and she's going down a hill and coming around a corner and the power steering goes out and she had to crank the wheel. She had to put the car in neutral, slam on the brakes and crank the wheel just to get off the road. And whew. Anyway, so fast forward now. So I was in a car accident 3 weeks ago. Now I'm in the market for a car. I've been looking around. I've been looking for a car anyway, but here I am. Now I need a car. And I don't know. Do I want a truck? Do I want a Jeep? Do I want something sporty? Do I want my doctor car and all that stuff? Now, knowing my dad's story, now I wanted my doctor car too at some point in my life. And so I decided to contact Ruben again. Ruben is the guy that sold me the car originally 7 years ago. So I can't get a hold of him. We're friends on Facebook. I get a hold of him. I said, hey man, so I looked at your lot and there's these couple of cars that I want to come look at. And so he's like, cool. Well, let me know when you're going to come by. We'll get the car detailed and we'll have it there waiting, ready for you to look at. I wasn't expecting this. It all kind of happened quick. Those car salesmen, they push things, but I'm really glad that he did. So I showed up there that evening after work and he's got a couple cars and he's wandering around. He's like, hey, you want to drive this one? You want to drive this one? How about and then there was the one that I originally wanted to look at. And so I test drove a Lexus SUV. It was okay. It was cool and it was nice and it was smooth and good gas mileage and all that stuff. And I just wasn't nah. So then we drove the one that I had originally contacted him about, but it ended up being rear-wheel drive. And that's not going to go around here. Snow flies. So we're going to go test drive it. He's going over to get the keys for it. And then one of the other salesmen is like, hey, so has Ruben shown you this car? And he pulls up this picture of this car. And I'm like, no, he didn't show me this car. And I don't know if I'll get into the details or not. Well, you know what? This is my boast in the Lord, because it is by God's grace and God's mercy that he has gotten me to where I am. So he shows me this picture of a 2017 Alfa Romeo, which I wouldn't have even ever looked at. I wouldn't have even considered it because I just figured they were outside of my price range. And I didn't really know that much about them. But he showed me a picture and I'm like, I like that car. And it was actually cheaper than all the other cars that I had already looked at that day. It was a smoking deal. And 2017, 41,000 miles on it. And so he shows me pictures of it. And I'm like, gotta be careful. Andrew, don't jump into this. I very quickly falling in love with this car. And so Ruben comes back. Other salesman shows him this picture. He's like, oh, geez, I didn't even realize that was ready to look at yet because they had just gotten it in. And one thing I should also tell you is when I showed up to meet Ruben that day, he's like, dude, you don't even look like the same person anymore. It's like, oh my gosh. Because like I said, I met him at my worst 7+ years ago. I was scraggly. I didn't have any muscle. I was fat, and I was just like, my mental state, everything about me was just disheveled and a mess. And this time he's like, bro, like, I don't know what you've been doing, but like, first of all, you look amazing. And just talking to him, he's like, you talk completely different. You talk like a different person. You are not that same guy that I met 7 years ago. Dude, he's just like, and he said, congratulations, man. He's like, this is so cool to see the transformation that's come across that you've been through in your life. It's like, just super thankful and appreciative. So we drive over, because the car that I bought was over in their detailing lot. And we drive over there, and I see it, and I'm just like I said, I had to be very careful to not play all my cards out on the table, because I saw it. That's the car I want. That's the car I want. And so we got the keys, and I go and I sit down in it, and I'm sitting there, and I'm looking around on the inside of the car. I'm sitting in the car right now, and I'm just looking around inside this car, and I'm just like, oh, something like this. I never thought I'd be able to even think about something like this. And here I am sitting in it, and I'm losing all objectivity, which is a bad thing when you're trying to buy a car. But like, I gotta confess, like, I was just like, I was buying this car. So then we got to drive the car back to the car lot, which is about a mile, maybe 2 miles down the road. So I don't even really get a chance to really like test this car, but I took the opportunity to put my foot in it, to give it some gas just to see what it would do. And it was like, and I know my poker face was gone, and Ruben knew by the time we got back to the car lot. He's like, you want this car, don't you? And I was like, yeah, I want this car. And he's like, all right, let's go see what we can work out. And so, again, how long it takes. I was there for another hour or two after that. But we worked out the down payment, because I'm getting a settlement from my other car. And we worked out the down payment, and we worked out all the details, and we worked out all the stuff. And when I drove home that night, I wasn't able to drive the car home that night because they needed to put new tires on it. But by the time I left that lot, I had a car. I had my doctor car. I had a sports car, which I'm not really a car guy. Like, I couldn't tell you all the makes and models and the engines and that a lot of people can. But I know that when I sat in that car and when I drove it, that this was a significant, several steps up, that this was God's blessing. And some people don't think of things that way. They don't think of material possessions that way. I do. I think of when we work hard, and when we work with God, and when we follow His will in our lives, and things start to go well for us, and we're able to get some nice material possessions every once in a while, that it's okay. Not only is it okay, but we are encouraged to be excellent. We are encouraged to do all things to the glory of God. And so this car that I'm sitting in is to the glory of God. Let me tell you, it is fun to drive, and I'm going to have to be careful, but I'm going to enjoy it. And I don't know how long I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep it for a while. I know I'm going to be driving it for a while. It certainly is fun, and it certainly feels good. And there's a little bit of that old feeling, that old poverty mindset where I don't feel like I deserve or earn any kind of nice things, and that as a Christian, I shouldn't spend money on things and stuff like that. But when I sit in the car and I drive it, and it resonates with me that this is something that God has blessed me with, and that I am following after what He has for me. And because of that, He has blessed me with this. And so I'm going to tell that story, because it's a story that needs to be told. When you work with God, He's going to give you the desires of your heart. I didn't even know I wanted this, but now I do. Now I know that this is a piece. This is the next piece of the transformation that God took me from, because I was homeless. I was a drug addict. I was divorced. I lost my kids. I had no money. I was living in a recovery house. My life was a complete and total mess. I was fat. I was lazy. I was all of the things. And now, this is just, to me, this is a sign that this is a symbol of what God has done in my life. And so I hope this blesses you, and I hope it encourages you to go after some things, to work on your transformation, to become a better version of yourself, and to let some of that be displayed on the outside. So really, in a lot of ways, this car is an external manifestation of things that have already occurred for me on the inside. I think it's not only is it perfectly okay, I feel like that this car is a piece of my testimony now. This life, this transformation, everything that I have gained as a result of all of this is a testimony of God's grace and work in my life. And I hope that people can see it that way. One more thing. I just wanted to give Ruben a shout out. You met me at my worst and you treated me like a good man. You met me now on my way up and you didn't treat me any different. And I want to thank you for that, because you have no idea how much you helped me out back then, and you have no idea how much it meant to work with you again this time. I hope I blessed you even close to as much as you blessed me. So thank you, Ruben. So if you like this content, please give it a rating, a review, and share it with your friends. Also, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about me and what I'm all about and what I can maybe do for you, check out my website at thedangerousgentleman.org. That's thedangerousgentleman.org. Thank you for listening.